everyone. I hope you have enjoyed the opening day of EmTech MIT. This is our annual conference on breakthrough technology and emerging trends. I'm Elizabeth Bramson-Boudreau. I'm the CEO and publisher of MIT Technology Review. We are delighted to have you here for our final session of the day. For those of you who attended today's earlier events, the MIT Health Lab tour and the Moonshot workshop, I hope you found them inspiring. I'm very excited to introduce you to this next discussion as we continue the day's storyline. That's about the transformation of an idea into a viable moonshot, the potential to solve impossible problems in unimaginable ways. Our discussion today, Tackling Huge Challenges Together, is about collaboration and preparedness, advocacy, mentorship, service, and sacrifice. And it comes from two very, very different perspectives I think you're going to enjoy. These are two people whose work and impact reach beyond the playing fields and research laboratories to resonate across borders and into the lives of all of us here, literally all of us here. We're happy to host the 10th of a series of LEAPS talks that explore the challenges in biotech. Before we introduce the main speakers, I want to invite Jürgen Eckhart. He is the SVP and head of Leaps by Bayer, and he's going to kick things off. Jürgen, welcome. Thank you to Leaps by Bayer for your support of EmTech.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's an honor to be here and to represent the Leaps by Bayer team and purpose. Leaps is Bayer's impact investment unit, tasked to invest in breakthrough technologies with the potential to address 10 huge challenges, or leaps as we call them. We have defined ambitious goals in both health and agriculture, such as curing genetic diseases and preventing food and crop loss. We know these leaps can only be achieved through collaboration. Our approach is partnering with some of the brightest minds in life science. Breakthroughs are only possible when we set our sights wide, when we are open to new approaches, ideas, and diverse leaders in science and beyond. This conviction is at the heart of our approach to investing, and we are so glad to be a part of EmTech and to bring you this LEAPS talk tonight. Thanks so much to our speakers, thanks to everyone at MIT Technology Review, and thank you all for being here. Back to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, so thank you, Jürgen. So it's often said that science is a team sport. History tends to elevate lone heroes, but from Albert Einstein to Venus Williams, no breakthrough is achieved in isolation. The huge challenges we face today, from ending pandemics, reversing climate change, these are best addressed when diverse minds and talents work together on solving them. Behind every pennant, trophy, Super Bowl ring, there is a unified team, people who did whatever it took to reach a goal. It takes a team of scientists, clinicians, creative minds to move a brilliant idea from the lab into the world. I would like to introduce our speakers today who have a lot of experience in these topics. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett has impacted everyone in this room. She is a virologist and immunologist who led a team that brought the COVID mRNA vaccines from concept to reality at the National Institutes of Health. She now serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Immunology and Infectious Diseases at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. In 2021, Time magazine named Dr. Corbett one of the 4 heroes of the year. One of the 4 heroes of the year, that's amazing. And the accolades don't stop there. The Franklin Institute awarded her the Benjamin Franklin Next Gen Award for her outstanding contributions to the field of viral immunology and vaccine development. She is a Hall of Fame honoree from the city of Los Angeles, and there is a proclamation in the town of Chapel Hill dedicated to Dr. Kizzy Day. And that doesn't even scratch the surface. Welcome, Dr. Corbett. It's great to have you here. And now I'd like to introduce Laurent Duvernay Tardif. Laurent played university football and attended medical school at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, before being drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. As the Chiefs' starting right guard, he is the first ever licensed medical doctor to play in and win a Super Bowl. That's pretty cool. Many honors followed. Woohoo! Many honors followed. He was made a Knight of the National Order of Quebec in 2019 and then enrolled at Harvard University to pursue a Master of Public Health degree. In 2021, big year for you guys, 2021, Laurent was honored with the Muhammad Ali Sports Humanitarian Award and was named Canadian Athlete of the Year. There are more accolades for Laurent as well, but we won't go through all those. And I don't have anything particular to say about 2021 for me, but I'm sure that, there's something good that happened to me that year too. When the pandemic hit, Laurent opted out of the 2020 football season to work as an orderly in his hometown of Montreal. He prioritized being in part of a different kind of frontline, helping patients with COVID and other illnesses in a long-term care facility. Welcome, Laurent. So this may seem like an unlikely pairing, and I think it is a little bit of an unlikely pairing, but there are some strong common threads that we're going to explore today. So for the audience, please hold on to your questions, but be thinking about what you'd like to ask. We're going to take those a little bit later, and you're going to get a chance. So just kind of be working through those. But I'd like to open by asking each of you to provide a kind of current snapshot of the work you're doing in order to sort of set the context for our conversation. So Dr. Corbett, please, let's start with you.
All right. First of all, thank you for that introduction. I don't even know what I can say to follow that up. Only to say that a lot of what I did at the National Institutes of Health came under this field called pandemic preparedness. And so what that meant is that the team that I co-led at the NIH, we spent several years, 7 years actually, working towards the goal of making sure that if a coronavirus arose as a pandemic, that we would be ready to deploy a vaccine very quickly so that we could stop that pandemic in its tracks. And so I studied coronaviruses with that idea. And the one thing that happened kind of as I was transitioning to Harvard last summer to my professorship was that we all were thinking about SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 not going away ever, which it's not, but hoping that we would get to this thing called endemicity, where the virus is predictable, it's seasonal, we'd start to be able to and have better therapeutics and et cetera. But I realized that we didn't know how to handle these endemics. And that's actually a shame because there are 4 other coronaviruses that have been endemic since the 60s that we have just failed to study. And so I now, in my lab, I'm taking under the task, to put it lightly, of thinking about endemic preparedness. How do we, when we have these pandemics, transition our medicines and our vaccines to this space where we're living and co-evolving with these bugs, and thinking a little bit about what that means for our immune system to be hit consistently with the same types of viruses. And so I say that I have a team, a lab of a diverse group of scientists. So I'm a viral immunologist, we have other viral immunologists, we have protein biochemists, we have structural biologists, and et cetera in my laboratory, with the whole point of coming together to make vaccines that are better for coronaviruses and other respiratory viruses that could potentially cause pandemics and then eventually endemics.
Okay. All right, we've got a lot we can look at further there. It's great to hear that we had a conversation about this word, and endemicity.
Endemicity.
And I think that's probably a word we all kind of need to learn and figure out how to pronounce. So thank you very much. I have a lot of questions. But first, Laurent, I'd like you to please kind of tell us where you are. You know, you've been a guy with lots of different, your hands in lots of different pies. What are you focusing on now? And, what's exciting?
Yeah, I mean, I got a really different background. I play football for a living, and also starting to practice at McGill at the Jewish General Hospital. I've been playing football for the past 8 years while combining my doctorate in medicine at McGill University. I'm not the best football player out there, and I for sure will not be the best physician out there either, but I think I'm a pretty good student athlete, we can say that. And for me, that notion of balance has been crucial for me. I think I was a better football player because I had medicine and vice versa. And when people ask me about how did you combine both, for me it's not that much about combining. Combining is just a scheduling issue. It's more about transitioning from one to the other. You go from playing in the NFL in front of 80,000 people. And then you have a whole team of medical professional nutritionists that are there to optimize your performance. And whether you want it or not, you kind of build a little bit of an ego at the end of the season. And then boom, you lose in the playoff or you win the Super Bowl. And within a week, you're back as a medical student at the bottom of the food chain of the medical hierarchy. And now you're part of that team that is there to focus on the patient. And for me, that transition has been magnified through COVID because we went from winning the Super Bowl to working on the front line of the pandemic as an orderly. And that experience honestly changed my life for many reasons. The emotional toll, the emotive, it was tough. And it led me to opt out of the 2020 season. I worked in long-term care facility for a year. I went back to football. And now I think as I'm approaching the end of my football career, I've built a platform, and it's how can you use this platform to promote something greater? And my calling has always been health and public health. That's why I started my master in public health this past year. And it's to find a way to rally people, communicate, educate, mobilize people, and invest my time into a project centered around primary prevention. So we'll see how that goes. But that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay. So while the backdrop to this discussion is rooted in the pandemic, there are obviously a lot of lessons, and Dr. Corbett, you talked about this, that were learned that came from that experience of the development of the vaccine, of seeing how the pandemic rolled out and what the response, approach or sort of protocols were that we can focus on and learn more from for the next time. But I'm struck by your opening remarks from both of you and for a couple of different reasons. So my first question has to do with your commitment to public health and to using your platforms for a kind of a common good. There is clearly some sacrifice there. I mean, I'm sure neither of you were as well rested as I was in the rough months, those rough early months of the pandemic. I mean, I think all of us were, if you were at home, you were, you might have been anxious, but it wasn't like I was out there. I was not an orderly in a hospital. I was in my home, and I would, go to bed when I was tired, and, life was, in some ways, relatively easy because I was safe and I was at home and able to do that. But you were sacrificing. So why is that? Why is the work that you do important to you, Dr. Corbett?
So I always have to confess something about the science that I do or did then before the pandemic, in that the reason why I started working on coronaviruses was completely selfish. I wanted, to land a Harvard, Stanford, Yale professorship, and I knew that I needed to carve out a niche in some field, and coronaviruses was a wide open field. No other viral immunologist was doing the kind of work that I felt like my expertise could lend to, and so that's why I started. And actually, we didn't, as a team, we didn't think that we would ever have a vaccine go into even a phase 1 clinical trial. But we knew that at least we had this body of literature that was just waiting if there ever were a time. And maybe that time would be 20 years from now, who knew?
I just want to interrupt. So you chose the coronavirus well before any of us knew that word.
Yes.
Okay. And that was because it was interesting to you. You were interested in the understanding the structures of these viruses and all of the things that would that could lead to for you professionally.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. I mean, it was interesting from a science perspective. Like I like looking at viruses. I like trying to understand why the immune system sees viruses the way that they do, why our bodies can't make really good immune responses, or when they can, why they can. And so I like these very basic questions, and coronaviruses was just kind of a field for which I could answer that. But, you know, this is the thing about career trajectories, is that purpose has changed. And one of the things that I realized when the pandemic started and as the pandemic was continuing was that the importance of my work was far beyond just publishing in the great journals and far beyond potentially getting a job at some really great university, but it was about people. Mm-hmm. No one, even though I had these publications in top #1 journals in the world, no one in the general public had even heard of mRNA before.
Yeah.
We were talking about mRNA every single day with my team for the last 6 years. And when I got on CNN in April 2020, it was like, what? There's a vaccine called mRNA? What are we doing here, right? And so I was ashamed, despite the fact that most people would say I was a really good scientist. I was not being a good citizen. And so the importance of my work kind of shifted towards making sure that I call it bringing science to the streets, which is a little urban because that's where I'm from, but it is what it is, right? It is about making sure that I step outside of the walls of the glitz of my corner office at Harvard or at the NIH, and making sure that as the science is being done, I'm ensuring that people understand it and are able to grasp it in some lay terms.
Yeah.
Does it have to be your job?
It doesn't, actually. I am not paid most of the time for anything like media or anything like that. And especially in the pandemic when I was a federal employee, I didn't feel like it wasn't my job. Actually, a lot of the things that I said on Twitter or otherwise on Instagram, making these memes and things that people could understand, those were certainly duties outside of what were my 9 to 5. But we had to get people vaccinated. And when the vaccine was first approved under emergency use authorization, there were about, I think it was 2,000 people dying a minute or something ridiculous, right? And so it became extremely dire.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots to talk about here. I'm feeling a ton of pressure and stress here. It's a big responsibility. So, Laurent, you talked about, or maybe I talked about putting on a hold to your football career. It must have been incredibly tempting to continue. You were a rising NFL star, the Super Bowl. I mean, it must have been hard to make that decision. And what's interesting, what I'm going to link to, backstage I asked Laurent, because the only thing I think about with football is concussion. I don't know, it's just me. And I asked Laurent, how do you, do you work? I mean, your brain is your profession today. And you talked about the pressure. I mean, you put it more articulately than this, on the concussed football player in the locker room or in the, the rooms in the fitness rooms or whatever, to go, are you going to be able to play? You're going to be able to play. So that seems like an illustration of the kinds of the pressure towards playing. And what you were doing was saying, I see, and I'm going to carry a metaphor here, I see a concussed society, and I'm going to focus on, this incredibly, terrifying pandemic that's sweeping through my community. So that must have been hard. Can you talk to us a little bit about those trade-offs?
Yeah, for
the
sure.
Sacrifice.
There's a lot of things in your question. But I mean, to address the concussion part, I do feel like there's a paradox between, being a physician and playing football for a living, of course. So, and for me, it was kind of hard, I think, in my first year in the NFL to live with that, and at some point you're like, okay, what can I do to help, And I'm still, I think, the only doctor who played in the NFL, and I'm like, okay, can I bring kind of a unique perspective on that, you know? And I started being involved on the Harvard health study that was done for the NFL. I'm sitting on the health and safety committee for the NFLPA, and I think that's how we can make sure that we're still playing football 50 years from now, you know? And instead of like withdrawing from the discussion, I decided to like get involved in it. Now, switch back to the COVID-19. What was your question again?
Well, I guess it was really about how did you confront that pressure? How did you ultimately arrive at the decision that you'd be an orderly, the lowest on the totem pole?
See, that's the issue. It's not the lowest.
Okay.
No, but for real, and I think that's,
I mean, it's not the highest.
It's not the highest either. But why does it have to be vertical? You know?
Great
and
question.
that's something I learned because I was talking about the food chain of the medical hierarchy earlier, and that's the way I saw medicine throughout my years as a student and as a resident. But I felt like through COVID, we had that opportunity because it was kind of chaotic to revisit the way that we were operating to a certain extent, you know? And I was listening to the talk prior to our conversation, and it was like, why do we have to rethink our approach to cancer? I feel like we have to rethink sometime our approach to the healthcare system in general. And I think that COVID kind of, for me, it provided kind of that light, you know? And it was tough. After the Super Bowl, a month after I was working in a long-term care facility, I went in there with the mindset of a medical student. I was trying to like optimize everything, look at hypertension and diabetes and so on. And at some point, you realize that the people that you're treating, they're not going back home, and it's either COVID or something else. And the whole idea of like comfort and dignity and the difference between treating and actually caring for somebody kind of really resonated for me. And then fast track to that, we're in July, 4 months later, and it's the beginning of training camp. And throughout my whole time in long-term care facility, I've been working out. I was getting ready to go win the Super Bowl again. And at some point, you're like, wait a minute, like, does it make sense to actually like cross the border and then travel to a different city every second week, potentially becoming a vector of transmission just to play the sport that you love? You know, I've been playing football at that time for like 6 years. It's already 3 times the average career in the NFL. Maybe it's enough, you know, and I decided to stay home and to keep working. And it was pretty special because you were talking about the media earlier, like you never really know how they're going to react, you know. And in Kansas City, like it's a city of 450,000 people, or maybe a little more, with a stadium of 80,000 seats, you know. When there's a football game going on in Kansas City, the whole city is shut down. And when I was like, okay, I'm going to opt out, you don't know how people are going to react. And it ended up being received really positively. And I think a big part of that was because my head coach, Coach Reed, is probably one of the greatest leaders I've ever met, went in the media and supported my decision. But it was not like an easy thing to do, you know. And I remember on the call, when I was writing my statement, there was like the NFL communication office, the owner of the Chiefs, Coach Reed was there. Like there were so many people on that call challenging every single word of what I was trying to say. Yeah. So there's a lot. I don't know how you manage the politics throughout COVID, honestly, because I thought
we don't have all night, guys. We can't go into politics.
No politics. That's one thing we say in the football locker room. We say don't politics and don't talk about politics. Don't.
I'm here for politics, but just not here for politics. Good. Yes. So let's switch gears to talk about this idea of the team and the reality of many diverse people collaborating from all different walks of life and disciplines. Dr. Corbett, you faced an unimaginable timeline to get this vaccine into people's arms, and thank you. During a world health crisis, Laurent, you talked about as being an NFL player, you're definitely going to have people with all walks of life, all different beliefs. Somehow you had to find your way to achieving a goal together. So maybe we'll start with you again, Dr. Corbett. If you could talk about collaborating with the team at the NIH in such high-stress situations, what lessons did you learn that will help inform these next steps that you've already discussed?
So the sequences of the virus came out on like a Saturday morning, and we had already scheduled for Monday just because it's the normal monthly cadence of our meetings. This was like right after the Christmas holidays, I think January 11th or something like that. Meeting with all of our collaborators on one call. Mm-hmm. And so we were collaborating with Jason McClellan's laboratory at UT Austin. He's a structural biologist. He's the person that showed us the pretty picture of the protein that's on the surface of the virus. We were collaborating with Ralph Barrick's laboratory at the University of North Carolina. They were the people who are masters in animal modeling. So how can we test this vaccine in animals so we can know prior to going into humans whether or not it's working? And then another team at Vanderbilt that did a lot of work in a cell culture dish to understand what types of immune responses are made. And also on another call, Moderna. And it was almost like the universe like picked the moment for us, because it's not like we had to round up the troops over the weekend. Yeah. It was already there because we already had this network. And one of the things that I realized was like, yeah, like people like, oh, like you led this team. But honestly, I felt like I could leave the NIH and become a collaboration consultant, because part of the secret sauce in my nearly 7 years there was finding out what my weaknesses and my team's weaknesses were, and seeking out the people who were like nearly the best in the world or the best in the world at doing that. Yeah. And working together with the same mission. And that's really all that collaboration is. Yeah. And also, even though it's not always understood in academia, I'm finding, the most important part about that is that you also allow people to do what they're good at. And so we knew what each team was really good at. We knew what the end goal was, which was at that point was to get the vaccine into people's arms within 100 days. And we stayed out of each other's way until it was time to deliver whatever it was our intellectual product onto the next person. And I felt like that was so beautiful because it really talks to and justifies this idea of how diverse minds can come together. So, Moderna, for example, at that time, wasn't even big enough to employ an immunologist. Can you believe it? Like, I know, it's weird. They're like $1 billion company at this point. But, and so they couldn't do the immunology side, so we could do that. And so it worked because everyone understood each other's strengths. Yeah. And I come from a family of 7 siblings. We're all vastly different. I'm like the only PhD scientist. They're real estate agents, all these kinds of things, right? And I remember talking to my therapist at one point a couple of years back about the holidays and how I was always the sibling who was organizing the holiday party at my mom's house. And I know a lot of you're smart. So like a lot of you guys are the sibling, right? Yeah. You're always the one. It's so exhausting. No one wants to listen to you. You end up like buying all the food and like no one pays you back for like 6 months and like all these things, right? So anyway, I remember confiding in my therapist about that. And she said, okay, I want you to write down each of your siblings' names. And then I want you to write down at least one thing that they contribute to the party. And like, don't come back without that list. So I was like sitting around like scratching my head for that one thing. But I came back and I had like this one thing. And then she was like, if you took away that thing, would the party be successful? And it was wild. Like, even though I thought I was doing all this work, I was buying food and like planning and sending out an itinerary, like the nerdy type A things, like the things that my siblings were doing, like organizing fun games or making signature drinks were like the life of the party, right? And the party couldn't exist without them. And so I really try to challenge everyone in like team group exercises to do that, to like pick out the person who you think is the weakest link on the team because their skill set is far different than yours and you probably don't even understand it, but to write down that one thing. And then my therapist told me the next week to come back with another thing. And I ended up with a list of 3 things that each of my siblings do that is like so good for our family. And so when I hire people, I don't hire with like the idea that they're going to be successful in academia because they're Nature Science and Cell published. Many of them are, but not because of that. Is actually I work my way from the bottom up of people's CVs, and I end up coming up with like a very, 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 every time, an extremely diverse team that works together because none of them are strong in the same thing.
That is great, Dr. Corbett. Laurent, now what does your therapist say? No, I'm only kidding.
Actually, no. I want to know.
All right.
Like, what does a Super Bowl therapist say?
I do work with a sports psychologist, and I'll answer the question while answering about my therapist. But no, but it's crazy because when you show up to a training camp, there's 100 guys out there, and everybody can play from a physical standpoint. What differentiates people is how they think and how they execute in a stressful environment, right? And that's why I started working with a therapist as well for my own personal issue, but also to
love it.
to try to be a better football player. And it's crazy because one thing we looked at was nonverbal communication, and I'll tie this up to the teamwork thing. But sometimes we were watching games without watching the actual plays. Just how do you react after a play? How do you walk to the line of scrimmage? How do you present yourself to the opponent? And just by how you look, you can tell whether things are going well or not. And when you start embracing that and the impact you can have on your opponent, because when you're confident, your opponent doesn't. And that's the beauty about football, is that it's like playing chess with the contact aspect, And when you get beat, no, but I love playing chess. But when you get beat, you physically get beat. So it's like, it's harder you come back from that, And that's the beauty of sports, and that's the beauty about football, is that you get 65 plays, and you get 65 opportunity to either win or lose. And you're not going to win them all, that's for sure. In my profession, in my position, I'm allowed like 10% mistakes or 10% defeat. That's 6 play in a game that I'm not going to have success. And the question is, how can you move the script, learn from your mistakes, and move on? And that's where the team comes to play. Like, football is so beautiful because I'm never touching the football. Like, if I touch the football, it's because things are not going well, right? But I got to find some purpose in the fact that my running back is running for 100 yards, or that, Travis is catching whatever ball is catching, and that Tyreek is running his route, and Tyreek's got to appreciate the fact that I'm blocking, and I gave Pat the extra half tick, and he was able to complete his pass in the Super Bowl, and that's how we won, So I think teamwork, when you're talking about hiring people with different skill set, I think that in football you have to. You have to, otherwise it just doesn't work. Like, you don't want a wide receiver that weigh 320 pounds, and vice versa. So that's why football is the most beautiful sport in the world. Just kidding.
So let's advance to the next question. So I think we've already covered that. So I know you're both active communicators, you're both active mentors. It is not often that we have research and practice together. Can you share your thoughts on how a practicing physician and research scientists, how both of you can see the value of medical innovation and how you can think about educating the public? Dr. Corbett. And I'll tell you what, let me just append a little bit of an extra question, because we did get a question from the audience, from somebody in Brazil who's watching us online.
Oh.
And I'm going to give you some link. I hope it links. Brazil is a person from Sao Paulo is writing in saying, Brazil is a country where the best science efforts were powerless against an anti-science government. Is there any hope of a vaccine against science denialism? So I think it's a great question, and I wonder how you think about that in the context of your role as a communicator.
First of all, I thought we were not going to talk about politics.
Yeah. Yes, I did
But
say
since
that.
we're here,
Yeah.
it is okay. So the first president that I met was President Trump. Well, at least during the COVID times, I've met other presidents, but and there was the idea that my being would be so important towards generating public knowledge for the pandemic and getting people vaccinated, because the idea was that Black people would be the subset of people who would be mostly denying the science and the vaccine technology. It turns out the biggest indicator of whether or not someone is vaccinated right now in this country is whether or not they're Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with the color of their skin. It is all about politics. And I'm actually from Hillsborough, like that, North Carolina. And, this is a place where the KKK still marches annually. I grew up in a place where I actually understand, as odd as it is to say, seeing how I am, the views of those people. And I understand what community means for different communities. And I think that played a large role in the way that I was able to communicate across boundaries. So I would speak with the NAACP, and then I would go and speak in North Carolina at Hog Day, which is just like a festival where everyone roasts pigs and drinks beer. And I would speak with President Trump, and I would speak to President Biden, and all of it was respected, and I felt like my voice was heard in each of the situations because of that. And I think that it is extremely important to remember that, and to remember that there is always a backdrop to the way that someone believes. And oftentimes that backdrop is simply from where they come. And sometimes it's not about from where they come, it's about to where they're going, because people do change up and switch. But you have to have empathy for people who think a little bit differently from you. So no, there will not be a vaccine against science denialism. But what I do think is that because the voices of even that subset, whether or not we agree or not, have been so loud in the last couple of years, I do think what it is doing is challenging us as scientists to take our thoughts and our opinions outside of the context of our data and reaching back into the hearts of people. And that's important because we often just ride the wave of this is right because the peak of the graph says so, the x-axis, the y-axis, look at this trend. It's very clear. How can you not see that? You dummy, whatever, right? And that's wrong, actually.
Yeah.
And oftentimes than not, you will find that when I'm talking to someone who doesn't believe in vaccines, I don't say anything about the data because it is actually, their belief isn't about whether or not they believe the graph. It is about whether or not they can find what you are saying to be equally as respected as the person who told them this or that. And so we're only going to be respected by coming off of our high horse, I think. And so we just have to do that bit by bit. And also remember that there are surely in some cases really good reasons why people don't believe in science, whether it be the historical context or personal things. I've heard, so many anecdotes. And so making sure that the way that we formulate our responses to people like that often take into consideration stepping outside of our shoes into theirs.
So, Laurent,
So the vaccine against anti-science is basically humanizing, being more human as a scientist.
Laurent, how do you think about using your platform to connect, to speak the stories of public health and whether it's science denialism or other types of topics?
Well, I didn't get as much exposure as you did or experience. For me, there's no question that at some point football is going to be over, and then the question is going to be like, because we're so privileged, like we build a platform, we build notoriety, and then it's like, what are you doing with it? And people get involved with right to vote movements, Black Lives Matter, and for me, my calling is health, is promoting health. So I do try to get involved as much as I can. And one thing you said about the importance of mobilizing people and communicating, I was going to say on their level, but it's not the right word. It's just finding argument that resonate with them. I think to me, that's one of the greatest examples is actually what happened in every football locker room in all 32 teams in the country through the pandemic. I had the privilege to sit on the COVID task force in the NFL. And what was special is that from a biostatistical standpoint, we had 53 guys in 32 locker room that were kind of like a similar sample size, people from everywhere in the US, different race, different background, different level of education. And even with that, there were huge discrepancy in the rates of vaccination in different NFL locker room. And the only difference is the medical staff. To me, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I saw it, right? And you got basically 32 team doctor, 32 head trainer that were communicating in a different way the pros and cons of vaccination, and the result were really different from one another.
So I hear that the NFL teams that were vaccinated the most were the ones that invited me, just saying. No, I actually did show up to Zoom to a lot of NFL locker rooms. But you're right. That's like one of the key points is that everybody drives home what they believe to their crowd, like the way that they believe it. And so you get different. I've even, since I moved to Boston, right, I've even gotten different messages from different physicians or even different professors, even at the School of Public Health where I work. And so it's really hard when you are a person who is lay to take in all of those voices and to understand how to make a message or how to justify which message is right or which message is wrong. And I think for one of the things that became very clear to me, which probably became very clear to you as you talked to different people, particularly football players who had their different views, is that during the pandemic, I think that people started to think of themselves as more free with their healthcare choices. We've always been fairly free with our healthcare choices, but this was a moment where it was respected that you be vocal about it. At least in some circles, it was respected that you be vocal about it. And I think that sometimes that free thought didn't necessarily come with critical thought. And I think that that's the specialty of scientists and people who are technologists, right? We are trained in critical thought. And if we can find a way to break that down and push critical thought to the general public, not, in like a lesson plan fashion or some 5-year course, how we did it when we got our PhDs or whatever. But if we can find a way to do that in a lay fashion, then we don't have to necessarily worry about who's against us, because the thought process around all of the noise, the general public will start to be able to dissect that. So I have no idea how to do that, but I do think that is one strategy towards getting us to where we want to go.
So we're going to open to questions and let people in the room ask questions. So be ready, we should probably raise the lights now. And we're going to try and race through some questions here. But what I'd like a question for you as people are kind of getting themselves ready for that. What kind of impact do you hope to have in the world now, going forward? And I'll start with you this time, Laurent.
Well, that kind of impact.
Yes, that's a good, good aspiration.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly. I think for me that triangle between education, primary prevention, communication, creativity. I think there's something there, and that's whether it's with my foundation that aim at promoting that kind of like those values, or different public health action or speaking engagement or work or project. I think it's important to, we know that there's a metabolic syndrome in medicine. We know that obesity is an issue, hypercholesterolemia is an issue, diabetes is an issue, hypertension is an issue, and we have solutions. But I think we gotta mobilize people behind that, and it comes with education and having the political courage to invest in primary prevention So I think that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Yep, makes sense. Dr. Corbett, what about your vision for the future?
This is always so hard.
Right?
I know. I just want I want everyone to just love each other.
Yes, that sounds great. That sounds great. I'm happy with that. So raise your hand high if you've got a question you want to ask one of these wonderful people here.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm a current PhD student in bioengineering here at MIT, and I'm also from Missouri, so go Chiefs. I worked in science communication before I came to grad school, and a big theme that emerged from both of you today is how hard it is to communicate risk to people, whether you're trying to do preventative medicine or you're working in virology, which was not really a hot field until the pandemic now. So I'm curious, through your experiences, did you learn anything about how you would communicate risk now, or is there anything you would do differently moving forward?
Dr. Corbett?
That one of the things that I continue to say to people around getting vaccinated was that they, even now, right, about getting your booster, is that they had to assess their own risk around them. And that does, going back to critical thought, that does take a lot of critical thought. But the one thing that we cannot do is we cannot blanketly say, in the beginning of a pandemic, 60% of you will be infected by next week. That doesn't translate for people. And moreover, what doesn't translate for people, particularly in an infection like SARS-CoV-2 or a disease like COVID-19, where the disease manifestations are so broad, and most of us sit in this age range where if you get infected, most likely than not, you will not die, it's hard to translate to people how risky something is until it's at their front door. So oftentimes when I spoke to people, I pared it down. I literally have a slide for each state about, or in this regard, is I would pare it down to their neighborhood, helping them to see this is not about what's happening in Asia. This is not about what's happening on the West Coast. It's not about what's happening in the US, but look at what's happening in next door to you. And that helps people to really frame risk, because the truth of the matter is, for a respiratory virus, your risk is about the viruses that you in particularly come in contact with, and then obviously what you can spread on to others. So I think that, it's difficult. It's not cigarette smoke can cause cancer. It's not that kind of thing. So you really have to bring things down to people's neighborhoods, I think.
Yeah, so we've got so many people here who want to ask questions. We're going to take one more question from the room, and then you guys, it's like firing, right? It's like the keep it tight. So there was another question in the back, I think. No? Oh, because I also have a question. So yeah, let's take this question here. So okay, it's action round here.
Yep. So, Anish Simon. I work for an energy company. A question regarding, you mentioned about you could be a collaboration coach, right, Dr. Corbett?
Yeah.
So you mentioned about multiple teams outside of your organization that you work together to get somewhere. I can only imagine how different approaches they all had to the same mRNA vaccine thoughts. So how did you bring them together to a common approach?
The
Or
thing
was
is,
it conflicting?
none of them have any vaccine expertise except for us and Moderna. So nobody else had an opinion about mRNA. That's the important part. Remember, you have to make sure that people have. You don't always. It's not as stark as this, honestly, right? I'm being facetious, but making sure that people have different levels of expertise so that everybody stays out of each other's way and lets each other's expertise drive is very important. So when it was time to talk about mRNA, it was us and Moderna on the phone, and that's it. All the other teams were worrying about what they needed to worry about to make sure that the mRNA got to people in 100 days.
Thank God, but that's the biggest struggle that we always have, right? Everyone has different approaches and how to bring them together. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about collaboration and collaboration inspiring innovation. Can you all say just a quick couple words? We'll start with you, Laurent, about how you've seen collaboration inspire great things on the playing field, in the hospital room.
Yeah. I'll tell you a quick anecdote about when we were at the Super Bowl. And there's
People love Super Bowl anecdotes.
Okay, any
That's
game,
awesome.
any game.
Yes.
But it's just
No,
about
no, stick to that.
collaboration and the importance of winning culture. And I'll talk about it for a locker room. But like the way we went to the Super Bowl in 2020, we were down by more than 15 points every single game before we reached the big game. And we ended up coming back, and we won all of those games. By the time we got to the Super Bowl, we were down by like 14 points at halftime or something like that. And then I think we scored 1 touchdown, and then we were down by like 7 or 10 or 3 points. But everybody on the sideline knew we were going to win. And everybody on the other side of the field knew they were going to lose. And that's a powerful feeling. I'm telling you, it's the best feeling in sport. It's momentum and stamina. It's confident. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to try to replicate that in every team that I'm working.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you all very much. This brings us to the end of our discussion today. I want to sincerely thank Dr. Kizzmekia, Corbett, and Laurent Duvernay Tardif for a really great conversation about the power of collaboration and commitment and, together doing pretty extraordinary things. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There's so many more things we could have talked about, but we really wish you all the best and thank you for being here. And, we'll be following your work in the coming years. So thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks.